Good evening, everyone. Welcome to TIFF Bell Lightbox. My name is Keith Benny, and I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special event, our Trek Talks, Lawrence Krauss on Star Trek and Science. On behalf of TIFF, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, as well as our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. As a charitable organization, we'd also like to thank our members and donors for supporting TIFF's year-round programming and making our outreach initiatives possible. I'd like to acknowledge the Mississaugas of New Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, the original keepers of this land, for hosting TIFF year-round on their territory. Tonight's event is presented in partnership with CBS and the Canadian Space Agency. We'd like to thank both of these partners for making Trek Talks a reality. We'd also like to extend a huge thank you to Nancy and Kunal at the licensing shop for all of their help. A big welcome to all those of you who have trekked down here in the rain to join us here tonight. I know, not that great. I'm also excited to extend a welcome to our online audiences joining us via the live stream at Facebook Live and YouTube. So a few housekeeping items that we ask that you please place your phones on silent. No photo or video recording is allowed at any point, but we do have professional cameras capturing the event. There will be an opportunity for you to ask questions of Dr. Krauss tonight. We just ask that you please wait for a microphone to reach you before asking your question. So tonight's event is in part of our Trek Talk series, one of our major initiatives in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Star Trek. Writer and producer Gene Roddenberry and his collaborators conceived of a future where enhanced technologies, progressive values, and more tolerant social structures were hopeful models of diversity and cooperation. And it's from this starting point that we launch our Trek Talk series, and it features roundtable discussions and keynote presentations that consider the influence of Star Trek on our technology, on science, on space exploration, politics, and social justice. At this time, we'd like to invite you to join us for the final Trek Talk series in our event. On December 5th, we welcome Mae Jemison, a former NASA astronaut and an advocate for exploration, education, and social responsibility. Dr. Jemison will present a keynote on Star Trek and the future on December 5th. So please join us there at tiff.net/Star Trek for more information. Okay, so that's all the data and key business I need to impart to you. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest. Dr. Lawrence Krauss is a theoretical physicist and foundation professor in the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. The winner of various international awards for his research and writing, Krauss writes columns for newspapers and magazines and is the author of over 300 scientific papers. He produced and appeared in the documentary The Unbelievers, and has also appeared in Werner Herzog's new films Lo and Behold and Salt and Fire, which screened at this year's Toronto International Film Festival. So we're really excited to have him back. He is the author of 9 books, including the New York Times bestsellers The Physics of Star Trek and A Universe from Nothing. His latest book, The Greatest Story Ever Told So Far, is coming out in 2017. So please join me in welcoming Lawrence Krauss.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, good. That works too. Excellent. Oh, good. The galaxy's here. Actually, I'm going to go right here because I want to begin with a bang and have some fun. I hope. I hope we'll have some fun tonight. So let me see that. Actually, could you lock the doors? Okay. We're going to begin with a quiz. Okay, so you have to watch these first 2 clips very carefully. Let's see. Okay. Watch carefully now. And maybe I'll put it in full screen mode. Would that be nicer for you all? This is such a fancy auditorium. The least I can do is full screen. Okay. Except someone started in the middle. There we go. Okay. Very carefully. Let's just stop it right there. So we can. First question: what was that man thinking? Okay, that's rhetorical. I'll answer that one. He was thinking, what's wrong with this picture? And the answer is virtually everything. Okay, but the main thing is that aliens got it right, and Star Trek didn't. In space, no one can hear you scream. And you noticed in those first two clips, you saw several explosions in space, but you also heard them. And of course, in space, sound can't travel because sound is a wave, and a wave needs some medium to travel in, and in space, there's no medium, so you wouldn't hear those explosions. But it's even worse. Several of those explosions were hundreds of miles away, and you notice that you heard them at the same time as you saw them, okay? Which is a problem. Say tonight you were, after this, you rush out to see the last game of the World Series, and you watch Cleveland beat the Cubs, as they did Toronto, I'm told. Anyway, you watch someone hit a ball with the bat. If you're sitting up in the back where I used to sit, you'd see the ball get hit, and then you'd hear it a little bit later because sound travels more slowly than light. So you wouldn't even, not only would you not hear it, but if you could hear it, you'd hear it a long time later. So fine. Gene Roddenberry knew there was actually no sound in space, but he also knew that without sound there'd be no syndication, and so I'm happy he did it because it's been very good for both of us. But I don't want to. This is an election year where I live, and so I want, in the interest of fairness, I didn't want to mention it because it's an awful thing, but I want to show they don't always actually. Before I show this clip, they don't always get it wrong. Sometimes they get it right. So I want to show you an episode where they got something right, and it's an episode from Star Trek VI, the movie, and I've heard lots of physicists around the country talk about this. I remember when it came out, I had a student. I taught at Yale at the time, and I had a student of mine who was a hard worker. He's now a professor at Berkeley, in fact, and but one night when he saw opening night Star Trek VI came out, and then he made me go with him the next night. He said, "You have to see this scene. You just have to see this scene." So I want to show it to you. It's a morning. It's a little violent, okay, but it's alien violence, and that's okay. Certainly in the United States, it is. In any case, and so it involves this just to set the frame. These assassins board Chancellor Gorkon's vessel to assassinate the Chancellor, and they disable the artificial gravity, which is great. But they have their gravity boots on, which are nowhere near as nice as mine. But let's just see what happens. And I'll try and get rid of that bar, which I hope will. Now you notice when they assassinate the Chancellor, the blood comes out in nice spherical droplets, which of course is what liquid would. And you're used to tear-shaped, of course, droplets coming out of a faucet, but that's it in gravity. But in a zero-gravity environment, nice spherical droplets. Those of you who are as old as me will remember when the astronauts drank Tang in the old days, and they blow these bubbles with Tang, and it would be nice spherical droplets. So what do you learn from that? Well, you don't learn a lot of physics, but you learn how easily excitable physicists are. And because things are so rarely done right in TV that when something's done right, they get very excited. Now, the whole point of this is that you got to remember, and I'm happy there's no one here in uniform that I can see, which is a good thing. But Star Trek is science fiction, and fiction is the operative word. So they don't have to get it right. In fact, Gene Roddenberry said the Enterprise is a vehicle for the drama, and that's really what it really is. And so they don't really have to get it right. The science is there to make the plot go, but the plot is what's really important. So given that it's not about science, why would someone who likes to think of himself as a respectable physicist and write a book called The Physics of Star Trek? And the idea is that what's kept Star Trek going for now, its 50th year, is possibilities. It's about the possibilities of the future. A non-dystopian future, which is increasingly rare in science fiction, in fact. And the possibility of civilization getting beyond its petty myopic rivalries, which we're witnessing right now. And the possibility, of course, alien psychologies, which is probably of most interest to the Star Trek people, that what you can do with aliens. But mostly, and the mission of the Enterprise in 5 years is the possibilities of the universe, what's out there. And that's what science is all about. The reason I do science is I don't do what's practical. In fact, the work I do has no practical significance whatsoever, I'm pleased to say. But it's about what's possible. It's those fundamental questions that we all address. And so I thought, what better way to share my joy of the the real universe and the possibilities of the real universe than to look at the Star Trek universe and see when they mix and match and when they're together. And therefore use the vehicle, the Enterprise is a vehicle for something else, which is the human imagination. And in that book, which was written a long time ago, Stephen Hawking was kind enough to write the foreword. And he wrote, "Science fiction like Star Trek is not only good fun, but also serves a more serious purpose, that of expanding the human imagination. We may not yet be able to boldly go where no man or woman has gone before, but at least we can do it in the mind." And that's particularly poignant for Stephen to have said. So I want to spend the next while taking you on a voyage through the real universe and the Star Trek universe and see where they match and see where they don't. And so let's begin with space, the final frontier. And we're going to get to the wonders of Einstein and curved space and all that stuff. But like physics students, you don't get to Einstein until you pass Newton. So let's do that. Oops, let's go back and look at the galaxy, which is this one, I think. There we go. And again, because they like nice graphics here, I'll put it in full screen. Okay, so this is the stage on which Star Trek is placed. It's a galaxy. It's not our galaxy. Why? Just want to see if you're awake. You know, we live in our galaxy. Okay, we don't live. Well, most of us live in our galaxy. The Republican Party in my country doesn't, but the rest of them. But so this is but you know, this is the Andromeda Galaxy. It's the nearest large galaxy to our own. It's basically, if once you've seen one, you've seen them all. They're more or less the same, and it's about 2 million light years away. And so let's just pretend it's our galaxy. And if this were our galaxy, we'd be sort of located in a boring suburb, not Toronto, but where the sun is, right here. And this is our stage, and it's a pretty darn big stage. It's the distance across the disk of the Milky Way galaxy is about 100,000 light years across. And the sun is about 30 or 40,000 light years from the center of the galaxy. And there are about 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And I used to say there were about 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, but now apparently there are about 2 trillion galaxies, because a whole bunch more have been observed. So, but for a cosmologist like me, 100 billion and 2 trillion is the same number. But it's just a lot. And this is a problem, you see, because if you want to go around, these distances are so big, and by light years, of course, the distance between the Earth and the sun is about almost 10 light minutes. So if the sun exploded, we wouldn't know about it for 10 minutes, okay? And the distance between us and the nearest star is about 4 light years. It takes 4 years for light to get between us and the nearest star. And as I say, it takes light about 30,000 years or 40,000 years to get to us from the center of the galaxy, but 100,000 years for these distant stars, for the light from them to get to us. And of course, this galaxy is 2 million light years away, which means we're seeing it as it was 2 million years ago. We're doing cosmic archaeology when we look out at the universe, which is nice, but not the subject of this talk. So the problem is, if you want to travel around the galaxy, that's a problem, because it takes, even at near the speed of light, it would take about 40,000 years to get to the center of the galaxy, which does not make for an interesting episode. So the Star Trek people had to come up with different ways to do that, but there are problems, and Newton gives the first problem. So every time Jean-Luc Picard says engage, he's committing suicide, which is a problem, at least for him. And why is that? Well, say the impulse drive in Star Trek takes you about half the speed of light, okay? So there's a problem. Anyone here have a Tesla? I know there are people, but they're afraid, they're embarrassed to say that they do. Okay, anyway, someone here has a Tesla. Okay, a Ferrari. No, anyway, okay, so let's say you have a Tesla. You can go from 0, and I'm going to use American units here, just so it says 0 to, I'll use a Canadian, 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in about 2.9 seconds if you have the really most expensive Tesla, which is about as fast as a Ferrari. And when you do, as anyone who's ever been in a Tesla, when you accelerate, you get pushed back in your seat. And I don't own one, but I've been in them. And so we call that G-forces. And the astronauts call it G-forces. So when it's a consequence of Newton's laws. In fact, when you get pushed forward with some force, you feel a force pushing you back into your seat, equal and opposite magnitude. And so if I am accelerating forward at the same rate of acceleration as I would be, say, if I jumped off this stage, as gravity would bring me down, I feel a force equal to my own weight, 1g. Okay? If I accelerate at twice that rate, I feel a force of 2 g's, twice my weight. 3 times that is 3 g's. It feels like 2 people are sitting on your chest. Some people are used to that, and others aren't. But it's not comfortable. And it's about the maximum rate of acceleration that the current the past space shuttle astronauts like Mae Jemison experience just before they go into orbit. It's the highest rate of acceleration you experience for any length of time and still survive. So this is a problem, you see, because you experience this force pushing you back in the seat when you go from 0 to 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour, I should say, in a Tesla. But you see, half the speed of light is about, in kilometers, I'm going to say it in miles per hour because I know the number. It's about 180,000 miles per hour. So imagine, miles per second, I should say. So imagine not going from 0 to 60 miles per hour in, say, a few seconds, but trying to go from 0 to 186,000 miles per second in 6 seconds, okay? And as the writer said, you'd be turned into chunky salsa on the back of the spacecraft. Your seat would literally come up and kill you. Boom. Doom. So this is a problem. And the Star Trek writers knew there was a problem because anal physicists wrote in early on after the first few episodes and said, there's a problem. So they invented a solution they call inertial dampers. And they cushion you against the blow of any external fire, but also from the blow of your own seat that would kill you. And that's great. So you can ask, how do inertial dampers work? And the answer is, I have no idea. Actually, it's not quite true. It turns out that there is a way to do it, and some of you can puzzle through it and ask me at the end. But it's pretty fancy. Now, that's a problem and always going to be a problem. But in fact, there's a bigger problem, and it has to do with money. Okay, and it has to do now not with Newton, but with Einstein. There's 2 problems having to do with this. That Einstein. The first problem is, forget the problem of just g-forces. When you try and go near the speed of light, there's some interesting issues. The first one, which many of you know about, but is one of the most fascinating predictions of special relativity, is as you get near the speed of light, your clocks slow down compared to mine. And it sounds like science fiction, but it's not science fiction. It's science fact. We can measure it every day in undergraduate physics laboratories around the world and particle accelerators. It is a fact that when I'm traveling close to the speed of light, my clock slows down compared to you. So, if you're traveling maybe at a quarter or half the speed of light, my clock will be slow compared to yours by maybe 3 to 5%. So that's not too bad, because then you send the Enterprise out in a 1-month-long mission. Comes back on a Friday in the trip. It's a Saturday back home, but that's okay. I just flew from Europe, and the same thing happens all the time that way. So that you could live with. But now you see you got a problem. If you're really trying to travel through the galaxy at very near the speed of light, this is one of the tools that makes a lot of good science fiction and a lot of bad science fiction. The good science fiction being the book Planet of the Apes, Monkey Planet. Bad science fiction being the movie. If you're trying to go through here, it's really true that you can travel throughout the galaxy in a single human lifetime. Because if you're going from the sun to the center of the galaxy, it's 40,000 years if I'm watching you. But if you're on the spacecraft traveling very close to the speed of light, the whole trip may just take 2 weeks for you. So that's great. Okay, it means, and as I say, there's a lot of science fiction that's based on that. That's fine if you have a single spacecraft. But if you got a federation over which you want to have command and control, that's a problem. It's really bad if they send the Enterprise out on a 5-year mission and comes back 50,000 years later. Or if Kirk wants to shoot at a Romulan vessel and or Klingon in that case, Klingon vessel, and he asks for permission from Starfleet, and he says, and 50,000 years later he hears fire. Okay, it just, as they say in the film business, it destroys the dramatic tension. So that's a problem, and there's no way around that problem. So if you want to have a federation, you want to send starships around, the galaxy and stay in the same time frame, they can't go near the speed of light. Maybe half the speed of light is tolerable, but not much faster. Okay. That's one problem, but Einstein created a much bigger problem. And that one really has to do with money. Because in this case, money is fuel. The amount of fuel required to travel at near light speed is prohibitive. Okay. So I remember I did in a calculation in a subsequent book I wrote after Physics of Star Trek, but I did a calculation. If you want to take a single atom and accelerate it to half the speed of light using conventional rocket fuel, just a single atom, half the speed of light using conventional rocket fuel, the amount of fuel required would be greater than the mass of our galaxy. So it's not going to happen. I mean, NASA may appropriate funds for it, but it's not going to happen. And that's a real problem. In fact, of course, that's not, I mean, you'd say, well, that's foolish. Who would ever want to accelerate a spacecraft with conventional rocket fuel? You'd just use something fancier. And in fact, the impulse drive and in fact, ultimately the warp drive, but the impulse drive uses fusion drives, which is great. We can't control nuclear fusion right now, but let's say we could. Let's say we didn't use conventional rocket fuel, but used fusion. Well, you can show that even if we could use a fusion to propel a spacecraft, the amount of fuel required to do the following simple thing. I start out at rest, go to half the speed of light, and stop. Nothing fancy, don't chase any Klingons or anything, just start at rest, half the speed of light, and stop. Every time I wanted to do that, I'd have to find 6,000 times the mass of the spacecraft in fuel. Every single time I wanted to do that. So clearly, that's prohibitive. There's no way now, or in 200 years, or 300 years, or 500 years, we're going to be spending spacecraft at near the speed of light using any kind of fuel on board the spacecraft. It's just not going to happen. Okay? Now, there may be ways around that. In fact, both Mae Jemison and I are on a program called Breakthrough Starship together, which we're trying to actually send a spacecraft to the nearest star at 20% the speed of light. The spacecraft, however, is 1 gram. That might be possible, but it's hard to squeeze a person into 1 gram. Okay. So it's never going to happen that we're sending starships around with fuel, no matter what kind of fuel on board. It's just not going to happen. Now, having said that, you might want to turn in your comm badges. But of course, if that were the case, I wouldn't have told you, because I don't want it to be a downer. Because Einstein not only created the problem, the amount of fuel, but in some sense created the solution. And Einstein was a creative guy, and if he'd been around, he would have called his solution warp drive. And in fact, warp drive, which is what used in Star Trek to go faster than the speed of light, actually, and therefore sounds impossible, is actually, in principle, not so impossible. In fact, I actually brought a warp drive, which I'll show you in a moment. Yeah, which I made before the program, actually. But let me tell you how it would work. So Einstein told us, in Einstein's general relativity, space is dynamical. Space can respond to the presence of matter and energy. If you have the right kind of energy, you can get space to do what you want it to do. And it may sound, by the way, when I say something travels faster than the speed of light, some of you went to high school and remember from high school physics that nothing can travel faster than light, right? Maybe in Canada it's in kindergarten you learn that. The answer is that you have to be like a lawyer and parse that a little more carefully. It's true that nothing can travel through space faster than the speed of light, but space can do whatever the heck it wants. And space can expand faster than light. So in fact, here's how we'll build a warp drive. Say you want to go to the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, 4 light years away. And right now, with conventional rocket ships, it would take about 100,000 years. Say you don't have 100,000 years to spare. So all you do is you take a spacecraft up to a low Earth orbit, okay, and then turn off the engines, okay? And then all you have to do is arrange for the space between you and the nearest star to catastrophically collapse in, say, 5 seconds, and the space between you and the Earth to catastrophically expand in 5 seconds, and then you look around and you're by the nearest star. You haven't moved. Space has done all the moving. In general relativity, you can move from place to place without ever moving, okay? Because the space between you and other things is expanding. So it's very simple, okay? Now the question is that possible? The answer is we don't know. But let me just, before we get there, let me show you, because you may not believe it's possible. That's why I brought this warp drive. Okay. It's not much, but given the resources of TIFF, it really was all we could do in Canadian dollars. Anyway, okay, so this is a universe which I've created. It's a curved universe, and I've put some things on here to orient you. So here's a star system here. It's a kind of, if you can't see the details, it doesn't matter. This is kind of an impressionistic experiment. Okay? And then there's a star system here. And I have a great rendition of the USS Enterprise, which is right here, which I drew myself. And then I have the sun and the moon and Saturn, and here's the Hale-Bopp comet, and there's a little spacecraft behind the Hale-Bopp comet, in case some of you are that old to remember. If not, it's a really good joke. But anyway, so what I want to show you is, you notice I have the spacecraft on this tape, so it can't move with respect to the balloon, with respect to the space. I want to show you how the Enterprise can move away from this star system and towards this star system without ever moving with respect to its local surroundings, which is what you do if you built a warp drive. So let me try this. Try not to create a big bang. I'll go over here. Oh, that's good enough for me. Okay. So what I do is I squeeze this end of the balloon. This end of the balloon expanded out here. This end of the balloon contracted. The Enterprise moved away from these stars towards these stars without ever moving with respect to its local surroundings. And this is precisely, exactly what might be possible in principle if you can make a warp drive. The problem is, of course, that to make space do what you want it to, you have to find a very special kind of energy. And to make space expand behind the spacecraft, you have to fill it with a very special kind of energy that has what's called negative energy, and a kind of energy we've never created in the laboratory, and we don't know if you can create in the laboratory. But if you could, in principle, it might be physically possible to imagine doing this, to imagine doing it. NASA's already trying to go out and build them, which is just part of the example of the fact that NASA has problems. Because this is not an engineering problem. The question is a question of principle. Can you create that kind of energy? And the answer is we don't know. We just don't know. It's an open question at the forefront of physics, of whether you can create this kind of negative energy. In fact, beyond that, it turns out in order to create enough energy to do what you want to do, move a whole spacecraft through space, you'd again need more energy than is available in the whole entire galaxy. So this is just a question of principle. But it's a question of principle of whether we can create that kind of energy, and people like me get paid to try and figure out if that's true or not. Now, at this point, you may say, as my ex-wife used to say, who cares? And well, you might not care about warp drive in this case, but if you could create a warp drive, then you could create wormholes. Now, wormholes are much more interesting, especially people who watch Star Trek. So I want to show you one of my favorite wormholes from Star Trek. So let's go to that. If they can come back to here. Oh, look at that! I have to. My Apple Watch will open it. Good. There we go. And let's hope this darn. I'm sorry for that bar. It shouldn't be there. Okay. So this is one of my favorites. Not the one you're probably most used to.
Is it always on time, Bhavani?
Always. We see it every 233 minutes. Our scientists say it's due to radiation buildup in the accretion disk. The visible burst is very brief. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The first and only stable wormhole known to exist. It's yours for the right price.
Okay, I like that because it's sort of very realistic, because it turns out they sell the wormhole, but it doesn't work, but not till after they've sold it. It turns out to be a lemon. So things are the same in the future as they are now. But Premier Bhavani was very astute when she said it's the first and only stable wormhole known to exist. Because in fact, as far as we know, no stable wormholes exist. Now, what's a wormhole? A wormhole is a shortcut through space. So I have another, oops. Where is it? Well, what do you know? Hold on. I'll be talk amongst yourselves. Okay. There we go. That's all right. This will work. I have a. I love high-tech exhibits. Okay. This is a galaxy again, and say you want to go from A to B in this galaxy. It's a long distance. Okay. But if you curve space, and then make a little tunnel between them, you can sort of go from one to the other very quickly. It's what Jodie Foster did in Contact, and there were, as they say, there are wormholes in Star Trek. There's shortcuts through space. So I want to, okay, so I'm going to take it. Here's the tunnel. It's a toilet roll that I made black to make it look so good. And there we go. Okay, look at that. It's amazing. Okay, so here's a wormhole, shortcut through space. Now, the question is, can you make a wormhole? And the answer is, we don't know. But there's a good reason. You see, it turns out there's a problem with wormholes. Because to make a wormhole, well, what you do is you sort of make this very high curvature region in one universe, and you hope that there's another high curvature region in some other part of the universe, and they match up. Okay? But curvature is due to gravity, and gravity, as those of you who went to high school also know, sucks. Okay? It doesn't blow. And therefore, in fact, turns out we can show mathematically that there are no traversable wormholes if normal energy is all there is. Because we can show that the mouth of a wormhole, each mouth of the wormhole, will turn into a black hole in a time shorter than it takes to go through the wormhole. We could prove that. So there's no way you can get through the wormhole because the mouths end up becoming black holes if normal matter is all there is. But if you could fill the wormhole up with negative energy, which is gravitationally repulsive, then you'd be able to hold the wormhole open. And then there'd be traversable wormholes. Now, at this point, you might say, if, like my ex-wife used to say, who cares? And the answer is, well, you might not care, but if you could have traversable wormholes, then you could have a time machine. And everyone is interested in time machines, okay? We all want to go back in time and correct the errors of our youth or relive them, depending upon what we're thinking about. And you know, in fact, when I wrote the physics of Star Trek, it created a big stir because Stephen Hawking wrote in the foreword, previously he'd come out and said time travel was impossible. But in the foreword, because he'd read my book, he said, no, it may be possible given the laws of physics. And it was the front page of the London Times. Stephen Hawking changes his mind in a new book. And he'd given a very good argument for why there shouldn't be time travel. He said if there were time travel, if it was possible, then we'd already be inundated by tourists from the future. Which is a really good argument. I countered him, however, by saying they all went back to the 1960s and no one really noticed. So he had to agree. But it is a problem. Time travel is a problem because of these time travel paradoxes, and there are lots of them in Star Trek. But the most basic paradox that you know of is I call the grandmother paradox, which is what happens if you go back in time and kill your grandmother before your mother was born? Okay. Well, then your mother was never born. But if your mother was never born, then you were never born. And if you were never born, how do you go back in time and kill your grandmother? So it gives you a headache. It gives physicists headaches. So that's one of the reasons many physicists have said time travel is impossible because of these kind of paradoxes. But the great thing about physics in the 20th century is it's taught us, that whole century and now, that just because something seems impossible, it may not be impossible. Nature gets to decide what's possible. We don't. I keep trying to remind people of that fact. Just very simple. Nature determines the rules. And so it may determine that time travel is possible. If so, we'll have to somehow figure out these issues of causality and everything else. And the point is, if stable wormholes are possible, then time travel is possible. And I brought this not just to show you a wormhole, because it's a time machine. And I probably have enough time to show it to you. I think. Yeah, okay, well, do you want to see it or not? Okay, because it's really fascinating. Okay, I connect these 2 points with this toilet paper wormhole, okay? Now watch carefully. Watch really carefully. Want to see that again? There you go. Wasn't that amazing? That was time travel. Why? You can applaud if you want. Okay. 'Cause now I can take. Yeah, thank you. It's just high tech. Okay. Why is it time travel? Well, see, this end, as you can see, is very artistically taped so that that end of the wormhole doesn't move from point A. But this end of the wormhole did a big circle around point B, a circle that may be 5 light years around. And it was traveling at near the speed of light. Okay? So it took 5 years for it to do that circle. Okay, with me? That's if you're watching it from here and you look with a telescope, you watch this end of the wormhole move around 5 light years, speed of light, 5 years. But you see, if you're on this end of the wormhole, you're traveling near the speed of light, and your clocks are traveling slowly. So that whole trip may just take a week for you. But that means if you go through the wormhole, you come out 5 years earlier, 5 years minus a week earlier. And then you take a spaceship back here, maybe take 2 years to get back here, you arrive 3 years before you left. Okay? And that's really possible. If stable wormholes are possible, then time machines must exist. If time machines must exist, we have to change the rules. And that's fascinating. It's one of the many reasons, by the way, people think that time travel isn't possible. Or maybe negative energy configurations aren't possible to create. Because if you could create them, you create, well, I find this fascinating. When I first started to think about Star Trek, the two most fantastical things in Star Trek are wormholes and warp drive and time travel. But it's really interesting. If negative energy configurations are possible, then all these things are possible. Warp drive, wormholes, and time travel. And I find that really nice because at least we can say at this point that they're not yet impossible. There's still hope. Okay? Now, I want to start coming back to Earth, and I want to come back to something that unfortunately isn't possible. And it's the thing that seduced me into writing the book in the first place, the transporter. Because I travel in planes an awful lot, and I just would love to have a transporter. And I remember I was traveling back from New York to New Haven, where I taught at the time, and I was on the train. I was thinking, how would you make a transporter? And I realized all of the neat physics that you need to do to make a transporter. And I thought, well, this would be a neat subject for a book. So I started to think about it. And right away, I realized I would not make a transporter the way Star Trek makes a transporter. Because, so in Star Trek, the way they make a transporter is they take you and they dissolve you into a matter beam, and they take your atoms and move your atoms over here and put them back together again. Okay? I would not do it that way right away. Because, first of all, I have surfed the internet, and I have seen the light. I can take a Tesla again. I can download the plans for a Tesla, the picture of a Tesla, but I've never downloaded the Tesla. Okay? So the way I would make a transporter is I'd take you and I'd scan you and take all the information that makes you up as a human being. And then I'd take that information and transport it at the speed of light over here. And then I'd take some atoms I already have with that information and make another copy of you over here. That's not a transporter, because you're still over there. But that's really simple. I dissolve you, and now you're only over here. Okay? It's not so simple, because it turns out to heat you up to make your individual atoms, right, I'd have to release an amount of energy equivalent to about 110 megaton nuclear weapons explosions, which is, as they like to say, not environmentally friendly. But I'm a physicist, not an engineer, so I'm not going to worry about that, okay? So the question is, can I do that? Can I do that? And the answer is, well, it's kind of hard to think about it. How much information makes you up as a human being? Okay? Well, I have to scan you, and if I want to know the position of every atom in your body and what its energy levels are and what its nearest neighbors are doing, you can work it out. That the amount of information, how many of you have, say, nowadays, a 10 terabyte hard drive in your computer? No one. 1 terabyte. Oh, you have a 10 terabyte. Nerd. Okay, good. Okay. And it doesn't matter. This is either one. You'd have to stack those hard drives up from here a third of the way to the center of the Milky Way galaxy to store that much information. Much less how long it takes you to translate, depending upon your carrier, to transfer that much information. It would take you longer than the age of the universe to do it. So now that makes it impractical. But there's a world of difference between impractical and impossible. Okay? In fact, what's impractical will one day happen. What's impossible will never happen. And so that does not make us the transporter impossible. But alas, there's a very fancy law of physics that does make it impossible, as I would argue. And that's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in quantum mechanics. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that I can know where every atom is in your body, but at the same time I can never know what it's doing exactly. Or I can know what the atoms are doing, but then I won't know precisely where they are. There's always some intrinsic uncertainty. It's not a property of your measuring apparatus. The laws of physics tell you it's impossible to know where every atom is and what it's doing at the same time. So I could make an approximation of you over here, but I could not make an exact replica. Now, I'm not a biologist. I don't know if you have an eye in the back of your head or not, and you might volunteer just to see what it was like. But you can't make a transporter. You cannot reproduce a macroscopic object at the same fidelity, at an atomic level of fidelity. It just can't happen due to Heisenberg. Now, the Star Trek writers knew this, so they created Heisenberg compensators. And when asked, Michael Okuda, one of the art directors, when he's asked, how do they work? He said, very well, thank you. Which is probably the only good answer. But just to show you that the following could never happen it turns out the following could never happen if you made a transporter the way they say you make a transporter, but if you made it the way I say, then it could. So let's just watch this. This is one of my favorite episodes. It should have won an Emmy for Best Canadian Actor with the toupee. Okay. Well, except there's no sound. Oh, there we go. You turn up the sound, I think.
All right, Captain.
Has this been...
Can't get through there. Nothing serious. Don't leave the transporter room unattended, Wilson. We'll be right back, sir.
I'm going to leave that on because I love that picture. I just love it. I love that picture. In this episode called The Enemy Within, due to a transporter malfunction, Kirk comes back as two copies of Kirk, the good Kirk and the bad Kirk. Now, see, that's a problem if you're transporting the atoms like they want you to, because you can't just send the good atoms and then the bad atoms. But in fact, actually, if you did a transporter the way I would make a transporter, if you could make a transporter, that'd be possible. I can make it. In fact, it'd even be better. If, let's say you get sick, okay? Well, I could make backup copy of you, right? And then I shoot you, and then but the backup copy isn't sick, so it's really fascinating. The kind of philosophical issues you come up with if you could make a transporter are amazing, but happily you can't. But so even the Star Trek doesn't get it consistent, but that's okay. We don't care. Okay, I want to now move to something that is much more realistic, which is extraterrestrials. Now, just so you know, they haven't been visiting us and doing weird sexual experiments, in case you're wondering. But the idea of extraterrestrials is in fact quite realistic, because there are, as I say, now 100 billion stars in our galaxy. And one of the things that actually it's kind of an amazing development since I first wrote the first edition of that book is that while people like me, astrophysicists, knew that if you create a star in a computer, it almost always has what's called an accretion disk around it, and it fragments to form planets and such. So we're pretty confident that most stars have planets, or many stars have planets. What we've now seen is that pretty well all of them have planets, and much more exotic planets than we ever imagined. So there are perhaps 100 billion solar systems in our galaxy alone, and we've now, if you look at Earth, life began on Earth about as soon as the laws of physics allowed it. So, and out in space, there's the same, there's sunlight, there's water, lots of water. There's, in fact, organic materials. The basis of amino acids have been discovered in comets in our solar system. So it seems to me it's hard to imagine that life, in fact, is probably not ubiquitous in the galaxy. Now, that's just life. That's microbial life. I expect we'll probably find extant or extinct microbial life even in the solar system, since the book was written, we've discovered lots of interesting features of moons and like Europa, which have liquid oceans in them and probably organic materials. But microbes are interesting, but they're not, that interesting. Although they'd be fascinating to discover elsewhere because it would tell us that life really, probably not in our solar system because it'd probably be our cousins. But if evidence of microbial life is discovered elsewhere, that's probably an independent genesis. And that says that life really is ubiquitous. And then the question is, well, could there be intelligent life? And the answer is, well, it could be very rare. If you look at the Earth, it took almost 4 billion years for intelligent, a little over 4 billion years for intelligent life. Maybe in certain parts of the world it still hasn't developed, but to develop. And so there requires a relatively quiescent system and lots of other features. So it could be extremely rare. But the great thing about the universe in which we live is that rare events happen all the time. And so if it's possible, it's happening somewhere in the universe. So I fully expect that there's intelligence elsewhere in the universe. The problem is, I think it's highly unlikely that we'll ever know about it, because it's a big universe. And let me give you an example. So say I'm on a different star system, and most stars are older than our sun. Our sun's only about 4.5 billion years old, and the galaxy is about 12 billion years old. So there are a lot of stars that are a lot older. Let's imagine an advanced civilization that's been around since our Earth formed. And let's just say someone told them exactly where to look. Look at that star over there for life. Then look at the third rock from that star, okay? You find life there. Even then, the chance of finding life on Earth is intelligent life on Earth is almost zero. Because over the 4.5 billion years we've been here, it's only in the last 50 or 100 years that we've been sending out signals of intelligence by I Love Lucy and all the rest of the TV shows that have been going out. So even if you knew exactly where to look, that's 50 years over 5 billion, that's 1 in 100 million or so chance of finding life, even if you knew exactly where to look for intelligent life. And we don't know where to look. But it's even worse, we don't even know what channel to listen to. Okay? I know one of the reasons I don't watch TV is that there are like 200 channels in where I live, and by the time I find what I'm looking for, it's over. And so, but in the real universe, there are an infinite number of frequencies. How do you know what to look for and what to listen to? Well, astronomers have thought of that, and like everything, the answer to it comes from listening to Star Trek. So let me just play this.
Picard, what are you doing? I'm attempting to let our captors know we possess intelligence.
You don't think they already know that? They can hear us talking.
Yes, but they may not realize that we're communicating through language.
Captain Picard is letting them know that we comprehend mathematics by tapping out the first 6 prime numbers.
I know what he's doing. I'm trying to understand why.
Well, so are we. Okay. Oh, let's just leave him there. Sorry, Lieutenant Barclay, we'll come back to you. I don't want you to be distracted by him. Okay. He's very distracting. Okay, well, what they did is copy what the first group of astronomers had even proposed in the 1950s, that the idea is, what do you listen for? Well, you listen for some signal that demonstrates intelligence. In this case, mathematics demonstrates intelligence. And so you'll maybe listen for a signal with the first 6 prime numbers over and over again, or something like it. It's the kind of thing that Jodie Foster, again, listened to in Contact. But it's interesting. So people have been doing this for a long time, and things have developed a lot. And I want to show you a picture of the state-of-the-art device when I first wrote the physics of Star Trek, in fact. So let's go back here, and I think it's probably here. Yeah. This was the first. This was a state-of-the-art device. It could listen to 1 million different channels at the same frequency at the same time, but it couldn't. It didn't have the technology. The computer technology wasn't sufficient back then to listen for the first 6 prime numbers. So it just listened to a signal, went on and off and on and off. And it listened for 5 years, and then they ran out of funding from the government. So I think it was Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. I forget. One of them was richer than the U.S. government, and they gave them money and continued. And for this 10-year interval, they didn't hear anything. Okay. Now, what did that mean? Absolutely nothing. It meant maybe they're listening to the wrong frequencies. Maybe the signal is too weak. Maybe it's not an on and off signal. And that's changed. And so we're now, in fact, the same Russian billionaire that's funding the program that May and I are working on to develop a Starship is also developed a program called Breakthrough Listen, which is using the most sophisticated technology we have now to listen for signals for life elsewhere in the galaxy. And in fact, some of you may know there was a report of looking at oscillations in a star recently that some people thought, I don't buy it, might be signals of extraterrestrial intelligence. So it's a long shot, but as long as individuals who are rich don't mind paying for it, it's worth doing, okay? And it may, the point is that if we're ever going to learn about life elsewhere in the galaxy, this is the way we're gonna do it. It's not going to be through traveling with starships around the galaxy looking for them. It's going to be listening for them here. Now that may depress some of you, but just so it doesn't depress that much, I want to show you that in some sense that moral also comes from Star Trek, and then you'll be happy. Okay, this is an episode, one of my favorite episodes, because in this episode, Lieutenant Barclay becomes intelligent for 1 hour, and well, you watch what happens.
What do you want of us?
The same as you.
Mr. Barclay?
You're both on the same mission, Captain.
Mission?
Yes, sir. The Cytherians are exploring the galaxy just as we are. The only difference is that they never leave their home. They bring others here. Their only wish, an exchange of knowledge. They want to know us.
I love that picture. Okay. So, that's the point. The Cytherians, this advanced civilization, they learn about the universe. Instead of going out with starships, they bring things to them. But that's exactly what we're doing with the Hubble Space Telescope and the Next Generation Space Telescope and all of the devices we're doing. We've actually learning about the universe back to the earliest moments of the Big Bang and to the far reaches of not just our galaxy, but other galaxies by staying here on Earth. So it's the same moral as Star Trek. Now, that's a profound way to end this lecture, which is why I'm not going to end it that way. Instead, I want to show you some bloopers from Star Trek because it'll allow me a slightly different way to end. So the first one is, I want to warm you up. The first one's kind of simple. It's called In the Wink of an Eye. In this particular episode, Queen Dila is this queen, and it's a civilization that has a very fast metabolic rate. So they move so fast you can't even see them. Okay, and what happens? They speed with water, water from their planet. They speed up Kirk to their rate of speed. Why? Because Queen Dila needs a mate. So who does she want to mate? James C. Kirk. And they actually made in that episode. They actually got a lot of things through the censors because it was Star Trek. So they made in that episode, but then he decides to kill her. But that's not that's not unusual. But actually, he doesn't decide to kill her. He decided to stun her. So watch what happens.
This won't kill you. But the stun effect is not very pleasant.
Well, that won't work. Well, you go ahead. Try. Point right at me. My reactions are much too fast for such a crude weapon.
Okay. So what's wrong with that picture? Well, everything. Again. But it's really simple. It's nothing fancy, okay? So a phaser is a directed energy weapon. That means the beam goes out at the speed of light. So how does she know he's pulled the trigger? She sees him pull the trigger. But if the beam's going at the speed of light, by the time she sees him pull the trigger, she's been hit. It's really simple. Nothing fancy, no fancy physics. It's just you can't outrun a light ray because it gets there before you can see it. Okay? So I just wanted to warm you up. Okay. The next one, it comes from Next Generation. It's one that it's an error that I call the ghost error. After this movie called Ghost that some people liked, but I didn't like because it was stupid. But the idea is, there's this guy who dies and he's a ghost, and and he wants to show his long-lost love that he's really alive, so he tries to hug her, but his arms go through her, and he tries to lift up a penny for her, and he doesn't have. But every time he sits on a couch, every time he walks on the floor, so somehow his butt or his feet have these amazing abilities that the rest of his body doesn't have. And that happens all the time. So there's an episode called Out of Phase where Geordi and Ro get put out of phase with normal matter so you can't see them. Just watch.
Data, stop being so rational. Try using your imagination once in a while. These aren't just random patterns. It's me. Which way you point that thing?
So watch this. So they're walking on the ship.
He's in here.
Then she goes through the door, and she hits him, and he falls on the floor. Okay? And then she runs, he shoots at her, and it stops, and then, okay, forget it, I hate it. Okay. Now, this is an important lesson to learn because it's really kind of interesting, not only just that, the trivial aspect of not being able to stand on floors and walk on things, but more importantly, physics is a two-way street, as we learned with Newton's laws. If you get pushed forward, you get pushed back with equal opposite force. It's always a two-way street. So they're invisible. No one can see them. Okay, now I can dash your fantasies. Everyone has fantasized about being invisible for obvious reasons. But what are you invisible? That means light passes through you without being absorbed. But how do you see? You see because the light goes through your retina, it excites the back of the retina, and nerve impulses go to your brain, and you see. So you could be invisible, but you couldn't see. If I can't see you, you can't see me. So there goes your fantasies. And it's really a fundamental fact that you can't have your cake and eat it too. Geordi and Ro could not walk on the floor because they go through it, but they couldn't see everything around them because they're invisible. And in fact, as a 5-year-old pointed out to me after I wrote the book and I started talking about it, he also pointed out something very interesting. How do they breathe? Because the oxygen will go right through. You see, 5-year-olds are good. Okay, so that destroys your fantasies. So if it's simple, we destroyed your fantasies. Now I get to check if there are any physicists in the audience. Okay, let's watch this next blooper. First, I guess we have to watch the rest of this garbage. Okay, here we go.
Captain's log, stardate 46682.4. The Enterprise is docked at the Remmler array, where it will undergo a routine procedure to eliminate accumulated baryon particles. In preparation for the sweep, we are evacuating the ship.
Okay, there are no physicists in the room. How do I know that? Because they would have giggled. If you are a physicist, you should have giggled. Okay, so they're docked at the Remmler array, and they're getting rid of accumulated baryon particles. What are baryons? Baryons are a real name for particles. They're protons and neutrons, and everything that makes us up are baryons. So the Remmler array gets rid of the baryons. It's really important to evacuate the ship in that case because it's very dangerous. So it's just a little thing, but I wanted to test to see if they're. But then the last blooper is one of my favorites because it relates to one of my favorite particles in nature, which is neutrinos. You all know what neutrinos are. Actually, Canadians do know what neutrinos are because you won a Nobel Prize, or you didn't, but some guy did. You should know what they are because you should be intimately familiar with them because they're intimately familiar with you. Neutrinos are particles that are produced in nuclear reactions, like the nuclear reactions that power the sun, but they're very weakly interacting. So every second of every day, 6,000 billion neutrinos are going through every square centimeter of your body, and they go right through the Earth without even knowing it was there. So think of that. During the day, when the sun's shining, they're coming down here. At night, when you're asleep in your room, they're coming up through the Earth, through your floor, through your bed, and through your body. Think of that tonight when you're trying to sleep. Okay, so you might say, how do I detect neutrinos then if they go right through the Earth without knowing they're there? Well, we use the laws of probability. Most neutrinos go right through the Earth. But if there are enough neutrinos, then every now and then one of them might interact. Very rarely. And that principle was actually used. I want to show you. We built neutrino detectors, and I should have for Canadian content showed you a Canadian one, but what the hell? Let me show you the first neutrino detector that was ever built for solar neutrinos. This was an amazing device. This was built by a guy named Ray Davis, who's down there, and it was built in the 1960s. And it's in a deep mine in South Dakota, not quite as deep as the Sudbury Neutrino Observatory, but almost as deep. And it's a tank of 100,000 gallons of cleaning fluid. 100,000 gallons of cleaning fluid. And you could calculate at the time that of the billions and billions of neutrinos that are going right through from the sun, on average, the tank is filled with cleaning fluid. On average, one neutrino each day will turn an atom of chlorine into an atom of argon. So all you have to do is detect a single atom of argon in 100,000 gallons of cleaning fluid. It's pretty simple. You giggle, because again, you would assume it's not possible. But in fact, amazingly, it was possible. He did detect this. Turned out he got the wrong number, which took a long time to be resolved. And one of the things that Sudbury Neutrino Observatory resolved was that problem, which is why Art McDonald and others won the Nobel Prize. But this is not the largest neutrino detector. Neither is Sudbury. The largest neutrino detector in the world now is this one in Japan, which is 50,000 tons of water, and kept in a working mine with the water filled up here. Some physicists, and it's surrounded by phototubes, and this detector is kept in the dark. And this detector, and another one built actually near Cleveland, under Lake Erie, in 1987, discovered an amazing event. In 10 seconds, there were 19 neutrino events, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it was a lot. They discovered it was a signal of a star exploding at the other end of our galaxy. And we calculated in advance, some of us, how many events would happen if a star exploded at the other end of the visible our galaxy. And the estimate was around 20. And it's amazing that it was right, because these neutrinos are coming from the core of a star. Supernovae are the brightest cosmic fireworks in the universe, but it turns out the light is nothing. 100 times as much energy comes out in neutrinos. And it was discovered by this detector. Another one, which is why the head of this detector won the Nobel Prize and shared it with Art McDonald. So anyway, neutrinos are my favorite particles. I've thought about them for years and years. And this particular episode comes from Deep Space Nine. In Deep Space Nine, there's this civilization, these Ferengi, which, unlike us, value money. And in one of these Ferengi, Quark, he has a gaming casino, okay? And he gets a hold of a device that changes the laws of probability in its vicinity, which is a really useful thing in the gaming casino. Donald Trump would like that. And I hope he would, yeah, he'd probably want to change the laws of probability having to do with polls, too. But anyway, I'm sorry, it's on my mind. So he gets a hold of this device, and he starts to make lots of money. But Dax, the science officer, she figures out there's something wrong, because she sends in a beam of neutrinos through the gaming facility and finds out the neutrinos are coming out left-handed. Now that sounds stupid, right? But it turns out that nomenclature is right. Elementary particles like neutrinos are spinning, and so it turns out if they're moving this way and they're spinning this way, we call them left-handed. If they're moving that way and they're spinning this way, we call them right-handed. So she discovers that neutrinos are coming out and they're only spinning one way. So there's something wrong. The problem is, it's true. As far as we know, and we don't have the slightest understanding of why, neutrinos are only left-handed. Neutrinos only spin one way. And we don't understand why. We think it's intimately related to the idea of why the universe is made of matter and not antimatter, and our own existence. But we don't, it's a mystery at the forefront of modern physics. But I like to think of some story writers from Star Trek sitting in a story meeting trying to think of the stupidest thing they can come up with, and it's true. Because that's the thing I want to relieve you with. Truth is stranger than fiction. But I shouldn't leave you, I do want to leave the last word to Q, because he should have the last word all the time. And I actually know him, and he's a nice guy. Let's see if I can get back to where. Okay, so let's have Q have last word.
Picard, you are about to move into areas of the galaxy containing wonders more incredible than you can possibly imagine.
Okay, and that's the point. The real universe is so much more fascinating than the universe of Star Trek. As we have no idea what the physics in 300 years from now will be, But I'm completely convinced that it is far more fascinating than anything the Star Trek writers could come up with. Truth is stranger than fiction. And science will reveal to us wonders we could never imagine, because the imagination of the universe is far greater than the imagination of humans, which is why we have to keep looking. Thank you. Thank you. Good. Well, no one died. That was good. Okay, I guess I can answer some questions. But I'm told that you have to wait till the microphone comes to you. So we have to wait till the microphone comes to you. Yeah.
Oh, hello. Oh, there we go. In the Enterprise, they use a matter, antimatter as their fuel source, I guess. But
yeah, for the warp drive.
Is that based on anything, or is it?
Well, no, it's based on a good idea, which is that it turns out if you wanted to get the maximum bang for your buck, as my friends in Los Alamos like to say, matter and antimatter will do it. Because, you know, fusion, for example, fusion releases only at best 1% of the available energy in matter. Einstein told us E equals mc squared. So in nuclear fusion, the mass changes a little bit and a huge amount of energy is released. Less than about 0.1% of the mass changes in a nuclear fusion reaction. Okay, but it turns out matter and antimatter will annihilate. Now, antimatter sounds like it's something from science fiction, but it's not. Antimatter exists, okay? And we create it all the time at elementary particle accelerators, for example. I just say that antimatter is strange, but only in the sense that Belgians are strange. Let me do the experiment. Any Belgians in the audience here? See? See? You never see them. I did that once in Belgium. It wasn't appreciated. Well, actually, they knew in advance that I'd done it. But so the idea is that antimatter is only strange because we live in a universe of matter. And why? Well, we don't know, it turns out. But we can create matter, antimatter, and we use it in particle accelerators. In fact, we used it in Chicago in the Fermi National Accelerator Lab, near that place where the people are going to lose in a few hours. And we accelerate protons around this way and antiprotons. And when a particle of matter meets a particle of antimatter, they'll annihilate completely, turning all of their energy into radiation. So it's the biggest bang for your buck. But it wouldn't create a warp drive. And by the way, if you use that for fuel instead of fusion, it'd still be a little bit better, but you'd still never be able to do it. Every time you wanted to start from rest, go to half the speed of light and stop, you need to get about 8 times the mass of the rocket ship in antimatter to do it. So it's, again, not going to happen. There's a young, oh, here we go. Oh, there's someone there. You're next. Okay, she's next. Yes.
Lawrence, the discoveries recently of what seem to be known, it's Mark here, of what's known as dark energy and dark matter.
Yeah.
What effect might these have on some of the possibilities of Trekkian technology?
Well, they have dark matter in some of the episodes. They didn't have dark energy. They made in the new ones. But, well, the point is that, again, dark energy is something that was wilder than anything the Star Trek writers could have figured out. Let me tell you what they are. Dark matter, both of which I work on, actually. Dark matter is in fact, matter that doesn't shine. See, we have very linguistic perspicacity among physicists. It's actually probably should be called transparent matter, because the point is, if we measure the mass of our galaxy, what is amazing is we find out that there's 10 times more stuff out there than meets the eye. And it's true not just for our galaxy, but for all galaxies and clusters of galaxies. We might weigh the heaviest things in the universe, and 40 times as much stuff is there as can be accounted for by all the stars and all the hot gas and everything. I wrote some books about it, in fact. So this stuff we call dark matter, okay? And what is really exciting is that we think it's not made it, because it turns out we can actually estimate how many protons and neutrons there are in the universe. We know, more or less. And there's 10 times more of this stuff than can be accounted for by protons and neutrons. So we think it's a new type of elementary particle, something that isn't made up of anything that is made up in this room. But that means, that's kind of interesting, because that means it's not just out there, it's in this room. It's going right through your bodies as you sort of nod off during this lecture. And that means we can actually try and look for it by building detectors like neutrino detectors. In fact, Super Communicanda and other ones like it are being used to look for dark matter, because they might produce a signal. And then we discover what is the dominant stuff of creation, because what's really neat, and this is again something Star Trek wouldn't have appreciated, is it means you're far more insignificant than you ever thought. Because if you take the beautiful universe of Star Trek, all the stars and galaxies and everything we can see, it's a little bit of pollution in a sea of dark matter. But as bad as that is, it's even worse. You're even more insignificant, because the dark matter isn't the dominant stuff in the universe. It turns out most of the energy of the universe resides in empty space. It's really weird. If you get rid of all the particles and the radiation and everything, space weighs something. And we don't have the slightest understanding of why. Turns out we predicted it, and by we I mean me, and in 1995. And then in 1998, it turns out, and by the way, when I predicted it, I didn't believe it was true, but it was being heretical because it looked like the only way to explain all the data. But it was so ridiculous that I was sure some of the data was wrong. In 1998, two groups of astronomers looked out, and remember, if you put energy in empty space, it turns out to be gravitationally repulsive, not attractive. So if the universe is full of this dark energy, as we call it, then the expansion of the universe should be speeding up, not slowing down. And in 1998, these two groups of astronomers measured the universe, looking to try and find out at the rate at which it was slowing down, which is what they were looking for. And what did they discover? It was speeding up. And in fact, what they discovered was exactly the amount of dark energy that we had predicted, which meant that they won the Nobel Prize. But anyway, sorry, these things happen. But that is something the Star Trek writers never would have thought of, because no physicist in their right mind would. What's the energy of empty space? Okay, it should be zero. Okay, but empty space has energy, and it's the biggest mystery in nature. We don't have a slightest idea why it's there, but it means, and this may be relevant for Star Trek if I were going to be a writer of Star Trek. Maybe it's a little exotic, but the universe is speeding up, and that means the longer we wait, the less of the universe we're going to see. Because distant galaxies are eventually going to be moving away from us faster than the speed of light, which I told you is allowed because the space is carrying them that way. And so I've tried to argue before Congress that if we're doing cosmology, we should be funded now. Well, because a congressman's long-term future is 2 years. This effect will happen over 2 trillion years, which may make it a little long for Star Trek, but maybe there'll be some episode where they have to see something before it disappears. But it is fascinating, and we don't have the slightest understanding of it. It is the biggest mystery in physics. Oh, yes.
Yes. Hi there.
With the cute hair. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm interested in hearing your opinion on the holodecks.
Oh, yeah.
And how the characters end up, and also in the Next Generation, how Picard could actually go, oh, I wanted to go into like the Dixon and into this chapter.
The holodeck is one of my favorite things in the Next Generation. And I wrote about it in Physics Star Trek. In fact, I said it was one of the more realistic aspects in a sense. Because the holodeck is based on holograms. And in fact, even at the time, Disney, if you go to Disney World, you'd see they use moving holograms, moving three-dimensional images. And it's just a matter of computer power. So I argued then, and I guess I was optimistic, because I said 25 years, and it's been almost 25 years since I wrote the book, before you were born. And I said you'd soon be able to go to the Paris room in a restaurant where the walls of the room would be three-dimensional images of Paris. You'd be sitting there and feeling. So that part is realistic. The problem is it's holodeck matter, because holodecks are holograms. That means they're light images, but that means you can put your hand through them. Okay, and in order to make it interesting in the holodeck, where they have all these action scenes, you go in and program anything you want to experience. You go in there and then you experience it. But of course, you wouldn't be. Anytime you do, you put your hands around it. Okay, that's one of the things that's wrong about the holodeck. The other one, however, is psychological. Speaking of my opinion, the biggest error about the holodeck is if it really existed, it wouldn't be used for what they say it would be used for. Because try and think, what would you use something where you could go in with no risk and repeat over and over again? Okay. Next, I'm trying to be, vague for the young people in the audience. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Doctor. I just wanted to ask you what you were most looking forward to the writers touching on.
Oh, I thought most looking forward to is the Cleveland Indians winning the World Series. But sorry, go on.
Or hoping that they would for the new Star Trek series that is being filmed here in Toronto.
Can I tell you this? No, actually, well, I'll tell you two things I'm looking forward to. First is that it not be so far in the future that it's just full of technobabble. That was a problem with Voyager. You know, it's just sort of, when you can solve anything with some weird scientific nonsense, then the plots becomes lazy. You can always solve it with some nonsense. Whereas if it's a little closer to the present, you actually have to be creative and make the stories interesting. So I think that's the first thing. But the thing I'm looking forward to more than that is the possibility that I might be in it. And I have to say, there actually is such a possibility. So we'll see. But it may be remote. But discussions are taking place. And so, anyway, it'll be mostly a female Star Trek, in case you didn't know. So I may have to do something to that. But anyway, so that's certainly my preference. Any other? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this. Oh, it's on. Okay. Matter energy conversion. Matter to energy. Energy back into matter. For replicators.
Yeah.
Food appearing out of nowhere. A steak that doesn't require an animal.
Yeah, that's like a transporter. You see, it's half a transporter. It's really doing what I said you do. You have the plans of a steak, and then you just put the atoms together, and you make a steak. Now, I think that's not as unrealistic as a transporter, because you don't have to make the steak exactly the same at an atomic level. It doesn't really matter if it's the same as the steak that's there, if there's some things that are changed at the atomic level. But the idea is very similar. Is they take the plans, and then they somehow take atoms and put them together in the right configuration. I mean, could you do that? No, but it doesn't violate any laws of physics. And if the oatmeal tastes a little off, it doesn't really matter, okay? Yeah. Somewhere. Oh, yes, way back there.
I know this isn't something that you mentioned before, but do you think that cybernetic communications might be possible, like in Star Trek Beyond, how Krauss swarm had that communication, and then the crew on the Franklin disrupted it and made them blow up? Like, do you think that might be possible?
Wow, you really know your Star Trek, don't you?
I watch it too much.
Yeah. Is your mother next to you? Yeah, there you go. You let her watch it a lot. Okay, it's good.
My dad introduced me.
There we go. Children do suffer for the sins of their parents. Okay, but look, no. A certain aspect. So if you mean that your thoughts can be received by others in some way, the answer is probably not. Telepathy or versions of that are in Star Trek, where some advanced civilization communicates by being sensitive, including, in fact, Counselor Troy in Star Trek. That's not likely possible, because, in fact, we already, when we have thoughts, the currents generated in our brains. So okay, and the point is that we can detect electromagnetic impulses that are very weak. The Arecibo radio telescope could detect a light bulb on Pluto already. That's the kind of sensitivity of that telescope. So with our detectors, if thoughts could be transmitted, we'd already be detecting them, okay? And so in order to transmit thoughts at a distance, you'd have to find something other that in a way that you couldn't already detect easily with radios or anything else. You'd have to use some signal that was some mode of communication which is much weaker than electromagnetism, okay, like neutrinos, okay? But the problem is, so I could use neutrinos to go at a great distance and I couldn't detect them, but I couldn't detect them. The average neutrino from the sun would go through about 10,000 light years of lead before stopping. That's a damn big detector, okay? So there are challenges to sort of that kind of communication. The simpler thing is just to use radios or anything like that. Okay, but it's a really good question, and I'm glad to see that Star Trek has been good for you. Are there any others?
I got one.
Oh, okay, because I like to end with a young person.
Well, pretend I'm young.
Okay. You're young at heart.
Absolutely,
Okay.
and in behavior.
Okay. Well, you're male. That goes
the
okay.
an admonition and then a question. The admonition is, I think you're really unfair to the technobabble writers. There is a pattern. Every version or every instance of technobabble in Star Trek must use the word phase somewhere. The question: what the hell is subspace?
Who the hell knows? No,
you're giving a lecture. Is there
okay.
anything, or is it just
I'll tell you what
technobabble?
subspace could be. That there's an analogy that at least captures. Look, the idea is subspace is a plot device that's necessary because, well, again, remember the center of the galaxy is 40,000 light years away. So forget the fact that it takes you 40,000 years to get there. If you want to send a signal to Starfleet Command, it's 40,000 years for that signal to get there and 40,000 years for it to get back. Clearly, that won't work for an episode where they want to communicate. So what they do is they say, well, there's some other region, not the 4 dimensions of space that we live in, but some subspace, some extra dimensions where you can send the signal and it'll go through a shortcut and get to where it's going so that, Picard can call Starfleet and get what he wants to know. So they invent it because it's literally an extra dimension. Okay, so it can be, if you go into that extra dimension, you can do a short circuit and go from place to place without having to travel from here to there. Like in extra dimension on the piece of paper, I can just get up, and then in the extra dimension, I can travel, which may be a very short distance, and come down in the piece of paper somewhere far away. Now, it turns out that in certain ideas in physics right now, particularly in string theory, that it's required that there be extra dimensions. It's literally required for that theory to be consistent that there be extra dimensions. And there are some versions of it. In fact, one of my students developed such a version, that where those extra dimensions can be large enough to have galaxies and everything else. In that case, literally 1 millimeter away from us in an extra dimension that we can't perceive, because our atoms and stuff are stuck to our 3 dimensions, there could be galaxies. There could be a galaxy 1 millimeter away in that other dimension. And maybe gravity would communicate across, but the point is that it's possible to imagine there are literally extra dimensions unbelievably close to us that we don't know about because we're stuck to our 3-dimensional space and 1 dimension of time. That's possible. I would say it's highly unlikely, and it's mathematically extremely ugly to imagine it's the case, but it's possible. So at least you can pretend that the subspace in Star Trek, which was just written as a plot device, has a potential analogy. Now, I'm trying to think your phase thing, because I did a TV show with William Shatner once early on my book, and it was going to be called The Science of Star Trek, but you can't show these clips. They Paramount charges about $100,000 a minute to show clips, unless William Shatner's in the show, and then it's free. So they had to have William Shatner in the show, and the show got changed from The Science of Star Trek to How William Shatner Changed the World. But in any case, but there's one scene in it where the very first scene we filmed together, actually, is he locks me into a room at night where I have to watch Star Trek all night long, and at the end of it, I read technobabble, and I had a monitor. But I don't know if there was the word phase. I'm going to have to watch that movie to see if it's okay. Anyway, yeah, we have a lot of questions. Good. Somewhere up there. Oh, way in the back. Okay.
Hi. I hope you can hear me. Wow.
I can hear you fine.
It's working. Awesome talk. Love it.
Thank you.
What?
Okay.
What I want to ask is about black matter, or dark matter, sorry.
Dark matter.
Dark matter, wow.
Yeah.
What do you suspect would occur? Because I've heard like dark matter will create a black hole when it's created or something like that.
No. I mean, people say all that stuff, but dark matter is no different. In fact, actually, it's harder for dark matter to create a black hole than normal matter, for the following reason. In order to collapse gravitationally, you have to emit energy, right? If I drilled a hole through this Earth and I let a ball go through, it would go all the way to the other side of the Earth and come back up here if there were no friction. But the only reason it doesn't go as high as it started is because it loses energy to friction. It radiates energy away in heat, okay? And then eventually settles down at the center of the Earth. The only reason stars form and planets is because normal matter can radiate away its energy. It's a remarkable fact that, in fact, if hydrogen didn't exist in molecules so that the gas, as it collided, could vibrate and emit energy, then stars wouldn't even form. So it's an essential part of compact matter forming that it can radiate an energy, okay, electromagnetic radiation. That's how it loses energy and collapses, ultimately maybe to form a black hole. But dark matter doesn't interact with electromagnetic radiation, and therefore it may not be able to radiate away its energy. We think that's likely the case, which is in fact explains why that if we look at galaxies, there are these halos. Most of the matter exists on the outside of galaxies, most of the dark matter. And we think that's the case because the dark matter can't collapse, because it can't radiate away its energy. So in fact, dark matter has a harder time forming a black hole than normal matter. Boy, am I doing well. Okay. Here's one. Oh, there we go. Okay.
So just as a follow-up to the question the young person asked about like telepathy and these sorts
Yeah.
of things, isn't it like, so there's lots of research being done on like reconstructing images based on brainwaves, like so people watch a particular movie or like they look at a particular image
but we
and then
need
they
to implant
reconstruct it.
electrodes to do that. Yeah, you can, I mean, that maybe, I fully expect that's plausible then in the future. In fact, we already can do it to some extent, at a very limited extent. We already, even the earliest experiments on cats, a former friend of mine, David Hubel, a Canadian, in fact, won the Nobel Prize for figuring out how vision worked in cats. And you could sort of tell whether they were looking at lines this way or this way by which neurons fired. So that's the case, but you have to implant things in the brain, okay? You have to put electrodes in to be able to see it. And my point is you might be able to have sensitive monitors, okay, that could detect those things that you didn't have to put implants in the brain, even though there's lots of electromagnetic noise in the background. But our brains aren't, you and I are not equipped with those ultra-sensitive monitors. So that's why, I can't detect what you're thinking and not. By the way, the other problem with telepathy is that signals goes down as 1 over r squared. There are lots of people who claim to discover, telepathy. And what they always find is that the people can read thoughts from 10 miles away as well as they can from 1 mile away, which just violates the laws of physics. If it's something that's propagating, then it's propagating in all directions, okay, because you can't direct it. And that means its intensity goes down as 1 over the square of the distance away. So if there were telepathy, and any real experiment found it, its efficacy would go down as 1 over r squared, and that's just never been seen, because it's never been seen. Yes?
Hello. I just wanted to ask, especially in the context of the possibility of President Trump, if you had any thoughts on the, if you had any thoughts
in
on
an alternate universe, please. Yeah.
If you had any thoughts on the Fermi paradox or anything to ask or to say?
Yeah, Fermi paradox is a really good paradox. Enrico Fermi, who's a great physicist, pointed out that if a civilization wanted to, I mean, the travel time is long, but as I said, it's only 100,000 years to get to the nearest galaxy, and you can imagine a civilization, if it gets advanced, would be able to go at a fraction of the speed of light, maybe even 1/100th of the speed of light. So it would only take a few hundred years to get to the nearest star. And if you work it out, you could actually propagate throughout the galaxy in the 12 billion years or so since the galaxy's been around. So as Fermi said, if the aliens are around, where are they? How come they haven't propagated throughout the whole galaxy? And there are lots of resolutions of that. My favorite one is that, that's assuming they go from one system and immediately move to another system, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to move from one star to another, okay? And so the reason to probably do it would be to find a new system that you could survive on, right? And then you might want to live for, depending upon how peaceful you were, and if you had no Trumps and stuff, then for thousands or tens or hundreds of millions of years. And so there may not be that imperative to move through. But the other argument, which I think is maybe even more interesting, is that the imperative to communicate may go away. Because if you were sufficiently advanced, then what would be the motivation to come here, or to communicate, or to leave? In fact, you may turn inward. You may just simply, be a civilization that doesn't have it or knows enough, and it just really likes to hang out and go or something. And so that's another resolution. The final resolution, which is the one you're probably thinking about when you think about Trump, is that advanced civilizations don't survive very long. And there is an argument called the principle of mediocrity, and Trump is by no means mediocre. That's an insult to the word mediocre. Is that things survive about as long as they've survived. And the argument is given, well, if you look at a Broadway show that's been around for a year, it's probably going to survive another year. If it goes out a bit, in a week, it's, So on average, you might imagine that technologically intelligent civilizations have been around, maybe pick maybe 5,000 years. So you might imagine that the lifetime of an intelligent technological civilization before it destroys itself is 10,000 years or something like that, in which case the reason that we don't see other things is that life doesn't exist intelligent life doesn't survive that long. But so there's lots of arguments that would suggest that get around it. But the fact is they certainly haven't contacted us. But I don't think, but some people would argue therefore they're not there. And in my opinion, there's no way of jumping logically from that to the other. It's not a logical necessity. Lots of reasons they might not have communicated. How are we doing? We're done? Okay, we didn't have time for one more? We're done? Oh, I was going to ask for one really good question. Okay. Oh, he is. There he is. Okay. Sorry, guys. One more question.
I don't know if this is a good question or not.
If it's not, then I won't answer it. Yeah.
If a civilization had the technology to create a Dyson sphere, knowing how huge and what an undertaking that would it be practical?
Okay, a Dyson sphere is, another friend of mine, Freeman Dyson, has proposed many things, none of which are practical. But that you might circle a star, essentially, with a sphere that would take in all the energy of the star. Because right now, actually, this is a good way to end, because it's practical, not that. But one of the reasons why we should be thinking about climate change and the fact that we should get off fossil fuels is the fact that the sun on Earth, every square meter on Earth, if you take up the amount of solar energy it's received, is about 10,000 times the amount of energy humanity currently uses. So there is no energy crisis if we can just utilize the energy of the sun just from on Earth. And a Dyson sphere, of course, takes all of that energy because it's an advanced civilization, needs all that energy. It's highly unlikely to me that you'd do that. I mean, you'd probably be able to move to another star or create your own star or do something else. But the lesson for us is that the sun is there, and we should consider using that energy because that will allow us to survive long enough to maybe overcome the Fermi paradox. If not, we're toast. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. Make sure you get that afterwards. So we will never look at the holodeck the same again. On your way out, please enjoy this clip on behalf of CBS about all the fantastic ways you can enjoy Star Trek from the comfort of your own homes. But once again, please join me in thanking Lawrence Krauss. Thanks very much.
Space.
Space. Space.
The final frontier.
These are the voyages of the starship Enterprise.
Enterprise.
Enterprise, her ongoing mission to explore strange new worlds.
To seek out new life and new civilizations.
To boldly go.
To boldly go.
To boldly go.
Where no man has gone before.
Celebrate 50 years of Star Trek.
Cheers.
With the limited edition gift set, get 30 Blu-ray discs featuring the original show and movies with the original crew, plus the animated series for the first time on Blu-ray, along with a 2-hour multi-part documentary. And available in this gift set, get a 50th anniversary badge, 6 mini movie posters, and hours of special features.
Is that all you gotta say?
And experience the Wrath of Khan Director's Cut. On Blu-ray for the first time ever, including nearly 30 minutes of new bonus content.
I would not presume to debate you. That is wise.
And for the first time in new ultra-slim Blu-ray sets, Star Trek, the complete original series, and the Next Generation complete series.
Sophisticated technology.
Resistance is futile. Surrender and prepare to be boarded.
That will be the day.
Fire.
Add to your Star Trek collection.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name Enterprise.
Available on Blu-ray today. And look for Star Trek and Star Trek Into Darkness. Available for the first time in stunning 4K Ultra HD. Plus, don't miss Star Trek Beyond, coming soon on Blu-ray and digital HD.